Hey everybody, welcome. I wanted to talk a little bit about cycling and putting cycling on narrow sideboard style cards. Good friend and co-creator of Limited Resources, Marshall Sutcliffe, and I have talked about this before. And you know, Marshall on Limited Resources and historically has had real issues with the nature of sideboard cards getting cycle. And before I answered his concerns with my thoughts, I wanted to make sure that I had his perspective correct. And so this is what I texted to Marshall. He said, or I texted this to him. I said, I have thought about your aversion to sideboard cyclers to share. I have thoughts about your aversion to sideboard cyclers to share, but I want to make sure I understand where you're coming from before I do. If I had to argue your position to somebody else, this is what I would say. They reduce deck building tension and skill testing by being such low downside inclusions, and they reduce play tension and skill testing because use it if you can, cycle it if you can't, is such an obvious and powerful baseline heuristic for playing them. I ran that by Marshall, and he says, yeah, that basically captures his concerns with these cards. And I actually think, Marsh, you need to take a breath and relax on the sideboard cyclers. They're good for the game. They're not bad for it. Your argument that they are making the game worse because of those loss of those tensions, I think is actually inverse. And let me explain. So let's go first to an example card. Here we go. Shredded Sails. So this was kind of a poster child for what Marshall is concerned about. Shredded Sails is 1 in a red for an instant. Choose one. Destroy target artifact. Shredded Sails deals 4 damage to target creature with flying, cycling 2. Now, if Marshall's concerns about cycling are valid, because it's fine, you know, when you make a mechanic, you should be asking yourselves the types of questions that Marshall is, you know. Is this going to reduce tension? Is this going to reduce choices? Are we making the game less decision intensive at the cost of the fun of the game? Yeah, wilt is another one, but this is a fine example. Here is my argument, Marshall. Like, if you took the cards that Marshall has issues with, primarily utility cards with cycling 2, and you removed the cycling and lowered the cost of the card by 1 generic mana. So let's say Shredded Sails was destroy target artifact or deal 4 damage to target creature with flying, no cycling. Well, the tension is over, Marshall. You're not playing that card. You're never playing that card in the main deck, like ever, right? So you're worried that the tension of whether or not to play these cards is gone. There's no tension there, Marsh. It's already gone. Nobody plays a Shredded Sails without cycling in their main deck. No, and if it's not an artifact enchantment set, for the most part, you don't even play a main deck naturalize, right? And you wouldn't play a main deck naturalize for even 1 less, because it doesn't matter that it's 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana. It matters that it's a dead card or a live card, right? So point number 1 is that the very thing that you're worried about happening is actually not happening with the cards the way you want them. If you take these narrow sideboard cards and put, then nobody's main decking them, and the choice is easy. Don't main deck it. If during sideboard they've shown that they have that type of thing, bring it in. That's the easy thing. The hard thing is, wow, it's got cycling 2. Do I run this or not? Right? I think adding cycling 2 to these cards, Marsh, introduces the very tension that you're worried is going away with cycling 2. And so that's the first thing. And then, because if it was the problem that you were worried about, here's how it would play out if your concerns were valid, if your concerns were important to take into account from a design standpoint. 100% of Shredded Sails would be played. It would not be a choice. You're saying there's no choice. Then what, have you played every Shredded Sails you've opened? Have you played every single cycling 2 card that you've opened? Of course not. So cycling 2 presents a deck building choice. It does not take away the deck building choice. It doesn't take away that tension. It actually adds it where it didn't exist before, because Shredded Sails without cycling is easy to figure out. Shredded Sails with cycling and an extra mana is deck building tension. So it actually gives you the thing that you were worried about it was taking away, Marsh. And then if we take it to the play standpoint, if you're talking about, well, it also removes tension and skill testing during play because, duh, it's obvious. Just cycle it if you can't use it or use it if you can. Well, that's a choice that didn't exist before. Again, let's say you were playing Shredded Sails with no cycling and it just costs a single red. If you draw that Shredded Sails, you have no choices. You're waiting for a target, or you're mad about it. Also, you're mad that you don't have a target and you're just waiting for one. And the choice is made for you. There's no choice there at all. There's no skill testing there at all. There's no choice there at all. You just wait and either there's something there for it or not. With cycling, you now have an in-game choice. I don't think the heuristic of cycle it if you can't use it, keep it if you can, is the way it actually plays out. The thing that happens to me is, well, I've got Shredded Sails in my deck, and Oppo is showing islands and plains, but hasn't shown an important flyer yet. And it's on turn 3, and I have no other play. Do I cycle Shredded Sails? Assume it's best of 1. Do I cycle Shredded Sails, or do I assume that 4 damage to target creature with flying is going to be excellent against this opponent and keep it, even though I have nothing else to do that turn? That's an interesting question, and that's tough. It's not so obvious to me because 4 damage versus flyers is like premium removal. So do you cycle that or not? Bam, tension. Where without that cycling, it's pretty easy to decide to include it or not. And then you have no choice about whether to use it or not. You're just waiting or not waiting. Cycling, once again, introduces the very thing you were concerned that it would take away. So I'm with you, Marsh, on let's keep an eye on the cycling 1, because cycling 1 is so cheap and that it gets closer to potentially producing the results that you're concerned about. Let's keep an eye on the cycling 1 cards like Go for Blood and other super, super hyper narrow cycling 1 cards. If we see these just being played 100% of the time, then I think you're right. Then cycling 1 has taken away deck decisions, taken away deck building skill, and really just made it easy for everybody to decide what to do. But I predict not even cycling 1 will be like that. I think even cycling 1 is enough of a cost with a slot in your deck, one of your 23-ish whatever spells, and the fact that it's low impact is going to create inclusion tension. And also, I would leave it finally on this, Marsh. The most frustrating thing about Magic, and the thing we have to help our new playing friends over, is the frustration of when Magic doesn't let you play your spells. Whether it's Mana Flood and you're not drawing them, or Mana Screw and you're just staring at them. It is the number one most frustrating thing, I think, for newer players, and maybe for all of us. It's the downside of Magic is that sometimes it presents these games that aren't games, and you just move through them and get to the other side. And again, I would rather have a choice to do something with these cards. I think the problem with all these sideboard stuff is that they're not playable enough. And so I think cycling 2 on sideboard style cards is actually excellent for the game. It's excellent for best of 1. That's another point. They really need to be taking swings at providing tools for limited and constructed players to have main deck sideboard style cards for best of 1. So even before the need to play to arena and the need to play to best of 1, I disagreed with you on cycling sideboard cards, but especially in a best of 1 world, I disagree with you. I think they're great for the game. I think we need them for the game, and I'm actually more on Ben S's side of let's get cycling to be an evergreen mechanic so that every set can use it to make these kind of tools to improve the best of 1 experience and to create deck building tension with sideboard cards where there wasn't before, and to create play tension with sideboard cards where there wasn't before. So I think it's the opposite, Marsh. I think everything you're worried about with these sideboard cards is actually providing the very thing you're worried that they're taking away. That's my take on it. I love you, Marsh, but I hope you learn to stop worrying and love the cycling sideboard cards. Any questions? No questions. All right. See you, everybody.